I would assume that probably most of the people who are logged on and watching this right now are probably from our church family at Ellisville. So hello. Um, Probably some of this stuff is going to be um, a little bit of a repeat because I've mentioned it in a couple of lessons and what I've been thinking about. But for those who are here that are not from our congregation, I'm Ryan and this is Adam. And we worship at the Ellisville Church of Christ right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. If you would please, it's just like regular services. Things are so strange right now. We're trying to just provide an alternative in the middle of the week to have a spiritual booster shot. So it's nice to meet you. I'm shaking your hand right now, fist bump, because we're going to be social distancing. But if you would just say hello in the comments so that we can know who you are and where you're from. Thank you for being with us tonight. We're looking forward to this time.
Yeah, and I'm going to be keeping a pretty close eye on the comments as we go. So if you have things you want to add to the discussion or questions or anything like that, I'll kind of weave them into our conversation here. We want it to be as interactive as possible. So nice to see everyone getting in and saying hello.
So let me give you just a real short version of where I'm coming from. Adam likes to tease me about that a lot. I can never just say, here's what we're going to talk about. I got to tell you where it's coming from. Adam and I are both involved with the Florida College Missouri camp. And at some point, some of you who are involved in other camps are going to be horrified by this. I don't have our Bible camp class material written yet. At some point, I'm going to have to write the Bible class material. And so I had a plan originally. What I was going to do is I was going to read the Bible. I have a Bible reading plan from January to March. I was going to read the whole Bible, and I'm tracing a couple of themes through the Bible and peeling those out and making notes. And so I'm not even finished with my reading plan yet because this is kind of something that came up here real quick. I got 2 weeks left. But the theme that I've been tracing and that I want to talk about with our campers this year has to do with God's rest. That's the first way that you see it mentioned in the Bible. In Genesis 2, we'll refer to that tonight. It has to do with a sense of peace. It has to do with hope. Some of the words that go with this theme are joy and rejoicing, being the kind of people who can really just be content to rest in the Lord and to live under the cloud of his peace. So
yeah, and when you were sharing these notes with me earlier, and as we were kind of thinking through this, those words like rest and joy and peace and hope, I feel like they're always words that attract people to us and attract people to the Lord, that he can offer those things. But now more than ever, when we can talk about a real peace, a real joy, a real hope in the midst of times that are really fearful, it's just that light is shining very brightly. And I think people are really looking for that right now. And it's one of the goals of this study to think about where that comes from and how we can make sure that we're shining that with the people that we interact with.
Yeah, it definitely is appealing to people.
Yeah.
All people who are Christians, people in the world. So let's start the discussion like this. Because of what's happened in our country, I guess in our world in the last couple of weeks, we have to have a pre-coronavirus conversation about this, kind of like when people talk about pre-9/11 and after 9/11, pre-coronavirus. We'll talk about how this conversation works within the last 2 weeks and what we're thinking and what we're looking for. And we'll give some Bible examples of people who are in distress. And hopefully, what I like to do is I like to just be real. I'll tell you about what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. And if you want to share in the comments, we can hopefully just help each other to do better is the goal. So my original plan at the end of last year in doing this reading plan and making this class material for camp comes from In the school district where my kids go to school right now, in this school year, there have been 5 suicides in our school district from the kids. I see these articles all the time. June of last year in 2019, this is from Time Magazine. The headline is U.S. suicide rates are in the highest they've been since World War II. And then in that article, if you look it up, you'll just look it up by that title. There's a chart, and the suicide rates go down until about 2000, and then they just start spiking. And we're in that spiking period. In that article, the second factor, this is the author's theory, the second factor for the increase of suicides, he says social media is a major contributing factor. We know that now it's used in younger ages and more intensively. We also see some new apps that allow more anonymity, which in turn allows more bullying, more kids talking about suicide without their parents knowing. So you've got social media. Supposedly we're more connected than we've ever been, and people are more lonely than they've ever been. Mm-hmm. There's an article from The Economist from January of this year. The title is America's Suicide Rate Has Increased for 13 Years in a Row. That really bothers me a lot, with our kids. My kids, our camp kids. And then on top of that, it seems to me like there is just this burden on the shoulders of our young people right now of stress and anxiety and just a constant sense of I'm not good enough and I need to be more. I think specifically about school and grades, I don't know how this all works together, but school is getting so crazy. I'm thinking about college. The cost, the expense is getting so crazy that you can't just go to school and try your best and have something to show for it. We put this burden on our kids and we say, you have to succeed. Like this, if you don't succeed, you might not have a future. This has to do with the cost, what you're going to be paying, your scholarships, and everything, opportunities. You know about that, I imagine.
Yeah, that hits a little close to home as I'm trying to wrap up school virtually. But I was also talking to a friend of mine who's a college admissions counselor, and she was talking about just the amount of stress and burdens that kids are carrying being totally different from what she saw even a few years ago, and just seeming to just ever increase, that these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids and even younger are just feeling such a weight on their shoulders that they have to be perfect or they have to be up to these kind of standards that just are ultimately impossible to meet.
Yeah. I got a text message thread from a teenager. I guess, I'm not sure. It was not too long ago. I'm not sure how much of this has to do with just normal teenage stuff. Teenagers are kind of mutants anyway in their own little way. But listen to some of these things. I'm a failure. I have no talents. I'm not good enough. I hate school. Can't ever make my parents happy. This stuff is just heartbreaking. And so, pre-coronavirus, this is my target. I'm shooting at arming our kids with the sense of peace and rest that God offers to target some of this stuff. I'm thinking about loneliness. Specifically, in 2018, there's a market research firm called Cigna. Forbes magazine, here's the headline on that one. Cigna finds more evidence of loneliness in America. There's another magazine that was referring to the same study, and theirs is a little bit bleaker. New Cigna study reveals loneliness at epidemic levels in America. And so I'm thinking right now about pre-coronavirus. 2 weeks ago, these are the things that I'm focused on, that I'm worrying about, that I'm thinking about our kids and our families. If our standard, let's talk about this, Adam, and if you want to jump in on the comments here, if our standard ultimately is the peace that God offers and God's rest that he intended for his creation in the very beginning, does it seem to you that we're moving farther and farther and farther away from that mark? And if so, can you think of any other symptoms or any other issues, stress, anxiety, stuff that's happening in our world today that we need to be talking about that needs to be a part of this?
Yeah, so I'll share a couple of things from the comments where I asked about some of the symptoms that we're seeing and what's maybe behind or emblematic of the problem of stress and anxiety. And we got things like pressure of trying to remain Christ-like while surrounded by non-Christians, you feel yourself withdrawing from people who care about you, but it's just hard to stay connected, or lacking self-esteem from not having that healthy relationship with God. Some of the things that I thought about earlier were just seeing so many people in the world, understandably so interested in solutions like mindfulness and meditation and
there's
things,
apps.
Yeah,
all kinds of apps for that now.
I think those things can be really good and helpful. So I don't want to come off as against that, but it's just to me, I think it can be, if that's all we're using, just putting a Band-Aid on problems versus really getting down to the solution and connecting with God, connecting to our purpose, and really trying to find a solution to the things that are bothering us, that are on our hearts.
Yeah. So that's pre-coronavirus. Now, I don't know if I'm just overreacting about this. I think I'm probably in line with most people right now in their thinking about this. But take everything that we just said leading up to 2 weeks ago, and then coronavirus happened, and now multiply it times 100.
Yeah.
Maybe, if we're lucky, 100. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about the stock market is at an all-time high. I mean, let's not even talk about
next topic
today. Jared, my heart goes out to you, dealing with investment and all of that stuff. I have been checking several times a day the St. Louis County Health Department website, because that's where I'm getting all of my local updates about group size, what we're allowed to do, what they're shutting down, all of that stuff. Today, the top note on the St. Louis County Health Department website is called Coping with Social Distancing. So basically, I've been worried about loneliness. And now what we've done is we've told everybody, isolate yourself from everybody else in the world.
Right.
For the unforeseeable future. And so here's what it says on their website. The constant media coverage of the outbreak of COVID-19 may be stressful for people. Yeah. Fear and anxiety about an infectious disease can be overwhelming and cause strong emotions in adults and children. A couple of days ago, on the 15th, here was the headline on St. Louis County page: Mental Health, Managing Anxiety and Stress. And so they just go through some different things about what it is and how to manage it. One of the things that they're watching out for is changes in sleep and eating patterns. That's me. I was telling Adam just earlier, in the last 3 days, I've seen 2 a.m., which is very not normal. It's either that I wake up around 2 a.m. and I can't go back to sleep, or I can't go to sleep at night and I'm awake until 2 a.m., which is a strange thing, but it seems like things are definitely worse in this department.
Yeah.
And so, here's just another discussion piece before we start moving into what I would like to accomplish. Over the next couple weeks, however long this takes for us to be allowed to worship with our family again, the short term looks like these issues are going to become more of a problem in the near future, not less of a problem. What are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about? Loneliness is already a problem, and we're telling the entire country to stay home. What are we going to do with our friends and our family, who their church family is their family and their social group, and they have no connection? What kinds of things do you think we need to be thinking about? Any ideas?
I did just post that question in the comments, so feel free to chime in about just how do we deal with issues of loneliness and anxiety. And it's hard when we're physically limited from our ability to get together. But Erica and I last night got to FaceTime with Luke and Sarah and baby Hazel for a few minutes, and just it's not the same as being in the room, but it's pretty close. It confused Hazel thoroughly. She was trying to figure it out, but at least doing things to somewhat go out of our way to interact with each other and check on each other and spend time talking to one another. If anything, all our time at home might give us extra opportunity to really have some meaningful conversations and sit down with each other, even if we're doing it over distance, in a way that could be helpful for us.
Yeah, yeah. Those social relationships aren't just, hey, how's it going anymore? It's, hey, what can I do for you?
Right.
And let's make this real.
Yeah.
Really stepping things up. You got anything in there, comments, before I move forward?
Yeah, there's a really good comment from my friend Emma. Hi, Emma. That she said we need to recognize that no amount of social connections can fix a lack of being known by God and knowing Him deeply. And that's a really good point. Just the idea that we need each other and we're made for each other, but we're also made for a deeper relationship with God. Yeah. And putting both of those pieces together is really needed right now.
Yeah. So let's go to Genesis chapter 2. If you want to open up your Bibles, what I would like to do tonight is really just kind of overview what I would like to accomplish, and the bones of how I'm going to accomplish that, or how we're going to try and work through it. I told you earlier, I didn't intend to even start putting these notes together until 2 weeks from now. And so it's kind of a formation process, and I'm really looking forward to having the comments there, because I sent an email to all of my camp staff and I said, hey guys, you have an opportunity to say, our kids, you love our kids. Let's put something really great together for them. And maybe we can help each other out of this pit. What I want to do is I want to say, what did God intend for creation? What did God intend for us? What happened to it? Why don't we have it anymore? And how are we going to get it back is basically the point. And so I'm going to assume that most of the people who are watching right now are pretty familiar with Genesis chapter 1. God goes through and creates everything. And I'm going to start reading in chapter 2 in verse 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host in them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day. There's our key word. That's the reason why I'm sticking with rest instead of peace. Mm-hmm. Because rest seems to be the word from the start. This is what we're after. This is what we want. And he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. So God makes everything, is finally finished on the seventh day, and stops. And the intent here from the text, I think, as you go through chapter 2, now what we're going to do is we're going to read about his relationship with humanity, Adam and Eve. His intent here is to say, okay, guys, I've made everything. I've provided for all of your needs. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to live under this burden of anxiety and stress and all the stuff that we're talking about right now. It's just going to be you and me and creation the way that it was originally supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It just gives me the goosebumps thinking about that, and it makes me sad to think about what we have now.
Yeah. You may be building to this, but how would you define the idea of rest and what rest means in the Bible? Because sometimes when I hear rest, it's almost can have a negative connotation. It's just like the absence of work, and clearly there's something bigger in mind with this kind of rest.
Yeah. So if you go over to Genesis chapter 3, I think the best way to describe rest here is to look at the consequences of taking that rest away. After Adam and Eve have sinned, and in chapter 3, verse 14, God curses the serpent. And then there's woman in verse 16. And to the woman he said, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you will bring forth children. I always hate to talk about childbirth because the women start to roll their eyes, but I'm like, I've had a cramp in my leg before. I think I know what it's like.
You're asking for eye roll emojis to start pouring into the comments here.
Yeah. So when Becky had our 3 kids, especially the first 2, Olivia, the third one, was a C-section, so that was a little bit different. But the first 2, Becky's right over here, by the way. Becky and my kids and Eric are sitting here with us, so you guys can chime in with your comments out loud. The first 2 kids, though, Becky is completely chill and easygoing in every way, but you don't appreciate why they call it labor until you watch your wife deliver a baby. And I think that is the opposite of rest. That's you have God saying, this is what I created. They sin, he takes it away. The curse is labor. Mm-hmm. We call it labor, and it's sweaty and it's exhausting and it's tiring, and you certainly would not describe it as peaceful.
Right.
In verse 17, to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten the tree of which I commanded you, you shall you shall not eat it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground. The opposite of rest. Mm-hmm. Your life is going to be hard. So God intended, I have created everything. I'm going to provide for you. Adam and Eve chose to not accept all of that on God's terms. And so the consequences of being removed for that rest is, okay, things are going to be hard now. Is there anything in the comments that I need to stop with here real quick, or just keep rolling?
No, I mean, Susan added that this idea of rest being unhindered fellowship with God. And that makes so much sense. And even Erica and I were at a wedding this weekend, and even in the midst of all of this, the couple is still wanting to go on a little trip, because when you love someone and you enter into that covenant, the greatest thing that you can think of is just to be together with them and have no distractions, no obligations, and you know what that means to just go away for a while and be together and enjoy that, and to think on such a more transcendent and permanent level that that's what God wants for us.
Yeah.
And then as we break that, you end up with the pain of childbirth, the pain of backbreaking labor in the field, because we've cut ourselves off from that.
Yeah. Yeah. In Genesis 3, I think we're going to spend all of next time talking about this in Genesis 3. You just have one problem after the next, I'm going to disobey God. I'm going to hide from God. I'm going to blame my spouse. I'm going to blame God. All of these things. Everything is just totally broken. And so from the time when Adam and Eve sin, you have this downward spiral that ultimately leads to the flood. Chapter 6 and verse 5, I think, is the best way to describe it. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, that every intent of his thought and his heart was only evil continually. And so think of it. Here's the pinnacle. God created everything. He intended rest, perfection, peace. Susan, unhindered fellowship. He was going to provide. We didn't have to worry about life. And then we have this terrible downward spiral. one of the things that's neat, I'm looking at chapter 5 right now and verse 29. These are some of the clues and some of the words that I really want to follow in this study. As we go through this theme of rest, you'll see stuff like this all over the place. Lamech has a son in verse 28. In verse 29, he calls his name Noah. All right, pay attention to the word Noah there. And he said, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed. So remember the curse that's going to take away your rest.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. And if you have an English Standard Version, there's a note next to the word relief. It takes you to the bottom of the page down there, and it says this Hebrew word relief here sounds like the Hebrew word for rest. So it's a play on words. We've taken away rest. We've taken away fellowship. Sinners entered the world. We've got stress, anxiety, hard work, toil, labor, burdens, all of these problems. And God says, I'm going to give you a solution, Noah, rest, relief. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the lights. We're looking for, how do I get it back? Anything before we move to Exodus chapter 1?
I don't think so, except to think that just sometimes Noah's world feels really relatable and all the darkness that was around him, and that God could use one person to start to provide some of that fellowship with the earth again. Just shows you the ability and the responsibility that we have as God's people to kind of be those nurturers on the earth and be that light even when it seems small. And times like this, it does feel small, but it can be really profound.
Yeah. So Genesis and the fall, moving away from God, that's going to be stage 1. If you want to prepare for next Wednesday, when we come together, these are the things you're going to prepare for. Read Genesis 1 through 12 and be watching for what is the problem and how can we fix the problem? Or I suppose I should say, how does God fix the problem? How can we get back to what he originally intended for us? I'm in Exodus chapter 1 right now, and I'm not going to read this whole section. As you start in verse 8, you have the Pharaoh who doesn't know Joseph. He makes life miserable for the Jewish people who are in slavery in Egypt. And what I did was I just made a list of the words and the descriptions that describe life for Israel under Pharaoh. So start in verse 11. I guess you would start in verse before that. It says that the Egyptians dealt shrewdly with the people. There's an unfair situation. But verse 11, you start to see some of it here. Therefore they set taskmasters over them. So I'm just making a list here. Taskmasters. The Egyptians set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. In verse 12, the more they were oppressed. So we have oppression in this situation. In verse 13, so they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves. In verse 14, they made their lives bitter with hard service. And then starting in verse 15, you're going to have the worst part of it all. We're going to kill your kids. Mm-hmm. And so what I would like to do, and internet world, whoever's watching right now, I'd like your input on this. I would like to take these words and I would like to have some sort of parallel to life and what we're talking about right now with our kids, with our situation in the coronavirus situation, the economy, the sickness. There's going to be death. There already is death. Mm-hmm. China and Italy, terrible circumstances. What are the parallels here when we start talking about the burden, taskmasters, affliction, burdens, oppressions? ruthlessly dealing with people, slavery, bitter life, hard service, all of these different ideas. What would you compare that to in your own life and our situation with our kids? You got anything that you're thinking about with that?
Yeah, I'm just posing that question in the chat. Um, it is interesting once you put it in that context of real slavery and real oppression, it can sort of reframe the difficulties that we go through in our own life, not making them less real, but just a helpful sort of framework to say, okay, for instance, one of the things I was thinking about was just feeling like a misfit or feeling left out of things that the world likes to do for being a child of God. And that is an oppression and that is a burden. Just to feel like people are laughing at you behind your back or think that you're missing out on things in life. And I think, especially if we think about young people, that's one of the hardest things about growing up is just having friends who go off and do things and then, want or just lead you to believe that you're really missing out on life by not participating.
Yeah. Yeah. Ruthless, affliction, oppression, hard service, all of these words,
Yeah.
Being a teenager is hard.
Yes.
And so here's what we're going to do coming out of that. You've got the problem. Again, we've got this downward, just like in Genesis 1, God created everything good. You've got this downward spiral, and Noah is going to bring rest or relief.
Mm-hmm.
You see a little window in chapter 5, Exodus chapter 5 and verse 5.
And I'm just going to chime in with just a couple of people's thoughts on some of the burdens today of addiction, debt, need for social acceptance, financial pressure, hopelessness. Mm-hmm. It's really similar to the things that we were talking about sort of at the beginning of the study that people are dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Interrupt me at any time. Hopefully I'll hear you. Exodus chapter 5 and verse 5. This is just a little window into it, but Moses goes to Pharaoh. He says, let us go. And you can see that Pharaoh understands exactly what's going on here. Pharaoh says, behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens. I would love to see Moses say, well, what I would love to see is Moses to say, God makes the people rest from their burdens. But to say to Pharaoh, yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to accomplish. This is not what we were intended to be. This is not how the world was intended to be. Affliction, burden, ruthless treatment, hard service. That's not what God created. What we need is somebody who's going to provide us rest from these burdens. And so in the Exodus picture, Moses is going to give us, he's going to give us that. So that's number 2. Anything there before we move on to 3? What about you, ladies? We're good. Go to Exodus 33, the next stage.
I guess as we're going over there, even Moses' requests to Pharaoh are for rest and just initially even just asking for time out in the wilderness to worship God. And all that they really wanted was those quiet moments with God, which, we may have been given extra for these next few weeks of quiet moments that we, can choose to use for good if we get the opportunity.
Yeah. Hey, keep doing that, please. Just get right to the point. We're going to do a lot of that in these lessons, but keep doing that because let's start it now. I really appreciate your comments on that. The third thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about presence. One of the major factors in the Garden of Eden and the way that God originally created things to be was his presence. He was there. Susan's unhindered fellowship. I'm thinking of Exodus 33 and verses 13 through 15. Now, therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider, too, that this nation is your people. And he said, this is God's promise to the people, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. So if we're going to talk about the original intent and how to get it back, we're going to have to talk about presence. This is where we're going to talk about the tabernacle, the place where God was, where he dwelled with the people. And even though it's later on in history, if we're going to talk about the tabernacle, we just will talk about the temple too. The place where God's presence is with the people. We're going to talk about what his absence means for us. I think about this stress and this anxiety that has plagued our world. And I can't help but look at folks who are often suffering and said, of course, you don't even know the Lord. I mean, we're not even talking about being present with him. You don't even know who he is. Of course there's no rest. That he is your rest. This is where the rest comes from, and you don't even know him. Mm-hmm. And so we're gonna need to talk about how are we going to be in his presence? How are we going to get that?
And that theme of presence is so big in the book of Exodus. We had a great comment about even the burning bush and God just saying, I am. And then the way that he shows himself through the plagues and the way that he ultimately leads the people out with the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire. Like, there are all these physical representations of God's presence that serve to sort of educate this new generation of God's people as to who he is. And now we see his presence in different ways, but it's still just as integral that we see him in our lives.
Right. Good. I'm going to go to 1 Chronicles 22, the next one here. What time is it? I'm gonna move along here. I'm not going to keep you all very long. 1 Chronicles chapter 22. If we're going to talk about rest and peace, we're going to have to talk about the Davidic king. And not only David. David was the one who went and fought for the land and got rest for the land and peace for the people in the land where God was. His presence was there. And one of the really helpful things, I think, to see what David did, but not only what David did, but what it means to be the son of David, that Davidic king that comes from his lineage. In chapter 22, 1 Chronicles 22, verse 7, David said to Solomon, my son, I had it in my heart to build a house to the name of the Lord my God. I want to build a house, so he's right there with me. Presence is there. This whole thing. In verse 8, but the word of the Lord came to me, saying, you've shed much blood, you've waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you've shed so much blood before me on the earth. Behold, a son, Solomon, a son shall be born to you, who shall be a man of rest. So, the son of David, the seed of David, is going to be a man of rest. I will give him rest from all his surrounding enemies. No more war, no more fighting, no more of this hard labor that has cursed all of creation. For his name shall be Solomon, and I will give him peace and quiet in Israel all of his days, and he shall build a house for my name. Why can he be a man of rest and peace and quiet? Presence. All of our themes are starting to come together when we talk about the Davidic king. So we'll need to talk about the Davidic king. Look at Isaiah chapter 11. For the most part, I think I'm going to cover. I don't know this one 100% sure yet. I think, though, that we're going to do pretty much all of the prophets in one class and one theme. Wow, you're a super fast typer. Even with the pecking method. Good job. I think we're going to do all of the prophets under one general theme. And as of right now, I've called it hope and restoration. The prophets are writing to a group of people who have moved away from God. They've sinned. They're about to, or they are bearing the consequences of that sin and being away from God. And mixed in with almost every single one of the prophets is this message of hope. If you will turn back to the Lord, the thing that's waiting for you is the presence and the peace and the rest that God intended from the beginning. So Isaiah 11 would really just be a little taste of that. Verses 6 through 10, just sort of a famous little passage. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. Think about that for just a second. A wolf laying down with the animal that it hunts and eats. They're together. What was violent enmity is now peace. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lay down with the young goat, the calf, and the lion and the fatted calf together. And a little child will lead them. A cow and a bear will graze, their young shall lie down together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox, no more bloodshed and killing. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra. Every once in a while on the internet, you see a picture of a kid in India grabbing a snake and, what are you doing? Don't touch that snake. But this is a picture of a world that's set right. The weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord. Here's our answer. When we come to a place of knowing God and being in God's presence, the curse goes away. And in verse 10, we get a little taste of how it's going to happen. We start talking about the root of Jesse. Obviously, Jesus is going to be the ultimate answer to all of these problems. And so I don't know how we're going to do only one class talking about Jesus. Maybe we'll have to spread that one out. But Matthew chapter 11 and verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. And then the end of that. And I will give you rest for your soul. It's everything that we've been talking about. All of the burdens of sin, all of the problems that have popped up in creation, pre-coronavirus, the last 2 weeks, post-coronavirus. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. The answer is Jesus.
This study made it clearer than ever to me that, of course, that would be Jesus' invitation. Like, just reading the book of Matthew, I didn't fully understand that he is going to fulfill what God was always trying to accomplish throughout the Old Testament, and man kept getting in the way of this idea of ultimate rest, ultimate fellowship. That is that call that we still sing about now, that he's the one who can give us rest. Like, it's just a beautiful picture of him being the bridge to that fellowship with God that we want and that we're so lost without.
Yeah. And I don't know how we can just skip over this point right now since we've emphasized it tonight so much. Presence. And the word came and dwelt among them.
Mm-hmm.
Here he is with us. It is a restoration of everything that's wrong. And here, this is what I hope to accomplish. This is the reason why we're doing this study right now. To anybody who's watching or who's going to watch later on, or we're here thinking about this right now, just think about this. As you go through the next couple of days, hopefully you're not spending too much time on Facebook. There's nothing but stress there.
Except for these 45 minutes.
They only come on Wednesday night for these 45 minutes. There's nothing but stress. I've been a news junkie the last several days. I told you, I'm up till 2 a.m. I wake up at 2 a.m., all of this stuff. How, the next time you're starting to feel weighed down with the stress and the taskmaster is bearing down on you and the anxiety and all of these things, how liberating is it to have an answer to the problem? Isn't that our problem right now? None of us know what in the world's going on. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to go out? Am I supposed to stay in? We have the answer. We have the answer to this difficult problem, and we know where the rest is. Look at Revelation 14. This will be our last passage that we read. I'll read one more passage at the end of this as a prayer. But if we're going to talk about rest and a restoration of God's intent for all of his creation, if you want to call it heaven, the end, the final restoration, the new heavens and the new earth, whatever it is that you're going to refer to it as, look at Revelation 14 and verse 13. I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. The ultimate end of a life devoted to Christ is the rest that God intended from the beginning of time. I don't know how you don't want that. I don't know how you don't want to share that with people.
Yeah.
Anyway, got anything else to say before we finish this up? Any big comments? I'm sorry that I'm not able to multitask here, so I'll go through your comments, and I intend to look at it tonight and say hello to everybody. Thank you for coming and for being here with us during this time. The goal is to have a spiritual booster shot. We may not even have Sunday to Sunday in the coming weeks. It's uncertain right now, but at least in the middle of the week right now. Thank you for focusing your thoughts on spiritual things with us.
Yeah, and we got a lot of great comments about additional passages talking about God's rest, and it was interesting to me, quickly looking through them, how many of them are from sort of the middle of the Bible, from the Psalm, from the prophets. You know, these prayers to God, these messages from God, so often focus on presence and togetherness and the oneness that we want to have, and I think that's where we're going to end tonight.
Yeah. Listen, don't let this thing get you down. There's an answer to the problem. Everybody in the world's looking for the answer. We know the answer. We've got it. I'm going to read Psalm 4 as our prayer. So if you will bow with me, we'll finish with that. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts, on your beds, and be silent. Offer right sacrifices to put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Amen. Thank you all. I hope to see you soon.
Thanks for being here. Please feel free to send either of us a message afterwards. We're figuring out all things live stream, and so if you have any thoughts about what we can do better or what you liked or didn't like, then feel free to let us know. But thanks for joining tonight.
Don't tell me if you didn't like me. Keep that part to yourself.